can go ahead and get started now. Welcome, everyone. I'm Karen Farber. As many of you know, I'm Vice President for External Affairs at Buffalo Bayou Partnership. We are the organization that is hosting this very exciting installation, Time No Longer. And I'm joined today with some of the artists who are collaborators on Time No Longer. I'll talk about them in a moment. I'm very excited to introduce them. Before I do, I'll talk a bit about Buffalo Bayou Partnership and why we do what we do. So we are the organization in Houston, Texas that is transforming and revitalizing Buffalo Bayou. We oversee the portion of Buffalo Bayou stretching from Shepherd Drive to the Port of Houston Turning Basin, which for those of you who are Houstonians or have been to Houston, you know, stretches across Buffalo Bayou Park through downtown and then east of downtown to the port. The project that we're most known for is Buffalo Bayou Park, which opened in 2015 to the public and is one of the great amenities of Houston now. And within Buffalo Bayou Park, we have one of our most visited sites, the Buffalo Bayou Park Cistern, which opened to the public in 2016 and has become really quite a glorious place to visit in Houston for all Houstonians and for those coming to visit the city. So we immediately, when we opened the Buffalo Bayou Park Cistern, knew that it would be both a place for people to visit to learn about Houston and the city's infrastructure history, and also a space for public art. And currently we have a major installation in the space about every 2 years. And we have had the leadership of an extraordinary committee of Houstonians who help steer us through that process of selecting projects for the Buffalo Bayou Park Cistern and bringing them to the public. One of the co-chairs of that committee for many, many years, Judy Nyquist, deserves tremendous credit for helping to spearhead the realization of this project, which we're about to talk about today. So I want to thank Judy, who's here today, for joining us, and also thank Lee Weingarten of Weingarten Art Group, who has served as project manager and curatorial consultant on this project and really was with us every step of the way as well. I also want to acknowledge the leadership of Buffalo Bayou Partnership and our board, and also the many donors who have made this project possible, some of them in a very, very major way, helping to realize this project, which otherwise would not be on view in the Cistern. So Time No Longer opened to the public on March 12th of this year, and it will be on view until December 12th. So we're so fortunate to have this project in space. It is extraordinary, it is ambitious, it is immersive, it is really something to experience, and I hope that everyone who is listening to us today will come see the work if you have not already, come hear the work if you have not already. We're going to talk both about what you will see or have seen when you experience it, and also what you will or what you have or will hear, because this is very much both a film work and a sound work. And so today we have the collaborators of Time No Longer on this call. Anri Sala, of course, the artist who was with us from the very beginning to realize this project, Time No Longer, who's going to talk about the vision behind this work, the origins of it, and the inspiration behind it, and what led to what you will see and experience in the space today, as well as two collaborators, Olivier Goinard and André Vida, who are with us to talk about the work as well. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about each of our artists before we start. So Anri constructs transformative and time-based works through multiple relationships between image, architecture, and sound, employing these elements to fold, capsize, and question experience. He is an artist whose work has been seen all over the world, several times in the Venice Biennale, many, many museums in the US, had a major exhibition at the New Museum in 2016. This is his largest project in the US to date in the Buffalo Bayou Park Cistern. We're very fortunate to have it here in Houston. And Anri, I think hopefully you'll be able to shed some light on your upcoming exhibition in Austria, which opens in July, and anything else that you're working on. So maybe we can talk about that at the end. We also have with us today André Vida, who is a saxophonist whose work you will hear in Time No Longer, and a composer who's living in Berlin. Vida has created performance pieces augmenting the physical gestures and energies present in the instantaneous moments of improvisation. And his work has also been heard and seen all over the world. We're very excited to hear about his role in this project today. And finally, we have Olivier Goinard, a French sound designer who started his career collaborating with many French filmmakers, many of whom you've heard of. He is also the recent recipient of a César Award, and I think that's not your first, and many, many other awards. Olivier has functioned as the sound designer for Time No Longer and was here in Houston from the beginning of installation to the end, really realizing this work in the space, working very, very closely with Anri Sala, and has worked closely with Anri since the 1990s. So thank you all so much for joining us. I thought that we could start with you, Anri, talking about the origins of this project. Either you can start with the moment that you visited the cistern, or even before that, where the kernel of the idea for Time No Longer really began, and then how it evolved over I think it's about 2 or 3 years that this project has been in its evolution. So if you could talk about it from sort of the beginning of that kernel and then to how it became what it is today, I think that would be a great start.
So yeah, the beginning of the beginnings, it was my site visit in the cistern. When I came there in a way when I have the opportunity to work in a very site-specific place, I try to not come with too many ideas up front, because I also like the fact that somehow the place advises, the place suggests I believe in the eavesdropping of the site specificity. So that was the very first one when I visited the cistern, walking the whole perimeter, becoming aware of its size and scale, but also its sense of being infinite, which was not in my judgment, was not only coming because how vast and big it is, but also because of this system of repetitions, because of the 221 columns that make you see all these corridors that are perpendicular to your view, all these columns that are in parallel, and also these other perspectives that you see in the diagonal when you're going just around the corner of the perimeter. And all this, of course, is also augmented in a way by the sense of the sound, by the acoustics of the place. So this was it's a place that surrounds you and also somehow finds a way into you, and I believe it does it for everyone who comes to visit that place. So that was the very beginning, and then on my way back, I always need to let the first impressions go. I don't like being impressed, like or be under the sort of the frontal attack of such a. So upon coming back to Berlin, I was thinking of different ideas. Of course, I knew sound would be very important to that space, which is interesting because there is a contradiction in it. It's in theory it's a space that is difficult for sound, given the very big frequency response, the very big echo in that place. But at the same time, sound is also what gives that place an additional dimensionality. So upon coming back, there are certain ideas that came in my mind in terms of in terms of where this is, it being in Houston, what somehow Houston represents in my imagination, and I guess in others too. This being the very place of from where endeavors start, whether and two of them happen to be vertical. One is like going under into the reaches of the earth, and the other one is going upwards towards the sky and towards the space. Yet when one of the difficult moments, or one of the most moments which I was myself in suspense, it was how to occupy that space with a presence that is that you can't name it necessarily in one dimension. Is it a film? Is it a narrative? Is it a video? Is it a projection? Is it a sound? But at the same time, it needed to be something that can accompany the visitor in his or her 360-degree visit of the place. So this is when I started discussing with Olivier very early on. This is also, I mean, Olivier is very often, because I work so much with music and sound, is very often, I would say, the first person I discuss ideas even before they draw themselves, so to say, in my mind. And then, but also soon afterwards, without yet having this specific idea, I also discussed with André. We met with André, and I've already made a model of the space of the cistern, and where I remember discussing all this, the rows of the columns, the numbers of the columns, like thinking of the space and all these columns as if there was some sort of a GPS or some sort of coordinates, and how these coordinates could translate in music and so on. And ultimately, I don't know where that idea came in terms of the turntable that is spinning in space. But somehow like the turntable became like a focus. The moment that this idea, that object became sharp to me, everything else came together. One thing that an additional thing that I would like to say, which brings to the sound and brings to the, and then maybe this opens also the conversation and the ping pong with André and Olivier, is that very often in my work, the music, it's never there as a film music. It's not something that comes later to highlight or to dress the images or the narrative, but it's something which is part of the physiognomy of the idea. So in terms of Time No Longer, I was thinking of what is the language of that space? What would be the speaking in tongues of the cistern? And this is then where the other coordinates of the idea came. I think that the idea that because the work would be in this space under the surface of the earth, is automatically my interest went into something which would be more upward in the space, so that there was something complementary between where one is and where one feels to be when one is visiting the Time No Longer. But before, I mean, I could come back into these ideas, but maybe instead of having this into these big chapters, I would start the ping pong with Olivier and André, and eventually this will bring us along other parts which are important to the overall idea.
Yes, and you know, before we dive into that, because so many people are joining us from all over the world that have not seen the work, we could show a little bit of video now. Now that you've kind of introduced the origin of the work itself, so we can give a sense of what it's like. It does not at all, the sound does not work at all the way that it works, of course, when you're in the space in
Maybe
person.
we can start with the excerpt of the film itself. and then later we could, in another moment, we could show the film in the space.
Yeah, so it will just take a moment to cue that up, but we're going to show some video now. And so we'll see it appear on our screen when it's ready. And then after we do that, we should dive definitely into talking about when the sound came into the work. If you began with the score, if you began with the visuals, sort of the starting place there. But let's watch this to start. Great. So that is an excerpt of the video itself, not the video in the space, and viewers will be able to see what it looks like in the space later in this conversation. But right now, I think it would be, having seen what we just saw, it would be interesting to hear from any one of you what we were looking at and the significance of the record player, which is a story that not everyone who's watching today will know. Oh, Anri, you're on mute.
Okay, I'll just say something maybe in relation to the object. So I was thinking of this object that has its physical qualities, that is somehow there in its sort of choreographic helplessness in zero gravity, and yet it has some quality, some sort of, I have called it before, acrobatic intelligence, where you have the stylus that, although it's at loss most of the time, cannot perform its task, which is to play the vinyl. Every now and then it finds the way to make contact with the vinyl. It finds gravity within the lack of gravity, so to say. So it's more like a gravity of will against the lack of gravity of space. And in that moment of making contact with the vinyl, we hear these short moments from the Abyss of the Birds of Messiaen, which is one of the movements within the Quatuor for the End of Times that he composed in 1941, when he was a captive in a prisoner of war camp in Germany. and maybe another element which is also as important to this is that, and they have certain things in common, is that one of my inspirations was the story of Ron McNair, one of the first Black astronauts to have been in space, who was to be the first and also a very good saxophonist. So he was the first person who was going to record professionally a musical instrument in space. So that unfortunately did not happen because of the Challenger disaster in 1986. So this is these two forces that inspired this object and this film that is floating there in the middle of the space. And then from there, I, in order to give, although the film is made in computer-generated imagery, meaning it's a film which is not shot because it had been almost impossible to shoot it or prohibitively expensive. Therefore, it was done completely through CGI. But although it was done in CGI, meaning that one can at will create and animate whatever you want, I still wanted it to have, to carry the cross of what it is to be in space and to spin in space. Therefore, it became very important, these moments of when it makes contact with the vinyl, when it plays the music, when it loses the contact with the vinyl, all the silences that entail, and how to find also a new continuity in this interrupted effort of the turntable to play the music. So this is like writing a script, I would say. It's a score, and maybe this is where André could start introducing us like very soon. We started a very close collaboration, the three of us, where we listened and separated the score. But maybe this is where André comes in.
Yeah, okay. Actually, I have a score here. So just to explain how we approached it, this what started off as a clarinet solo in this quartet for the end of time. We analyzed it, and I don't know if you see it so well, but basically we went through breath by breath, and then we saw what can we do with these phrases and this material. And Anri had immediately the idea of okay, yeah, thank you, that's a bit better. This first phrase, for instance, is a very challenging phrase and quite interesting to me because it's an example of a composer who uses something which he presents something to the performer which is beyond the possibility of a normal performer. So it's a kind of supra-human proposition for whoever is playing clarinet. And because of this, it's automatically pushing you out of your comfort. So this piece is kind of magnificent, and each breath is a kind of, it has its own intention and its own contour, and it kind of fits together magically. Like it's a kind of mathematical, it's like an expression of mathematical genius. It's also a very good example of Messiaen's use of this asymmetrical rhythms. So if you know a little bit about Messiaen, he was quite obsessed with collecting, transcribing bird calls. And so I'm assuming that this has, we looked it up, and I think in this one in particular, the bird he was referencing was the mockingbird. So Anri had this concept of approaching the score kind of by warping it visually to see what the musical result would be. So our way of doing that was, you can see in number 1, there's like this little, the second staff, and there's this 2 connected notes. This is kind of like the center of the breath. And so these 2 notes I played in unison with the clarinet. Now, what happened in the rest of the phrase, maybe Anri could jump in here more about this idea of the idea as if, how did you put it about the prism?
Yeah, this idea that, all right, I have to bring it back maybe where the idea comes from for me is that it's about solitude. It's about a piece of music that was written in a captivity, but it's also about this turntable that is that seems to be in the aftermath of a disaster, like the soul and last witness of some form of human sensibility. So I thought that between these two solitudes in their own right and their own nature, it would be interesting to produce a moment of empathy, a moment of company. And yet this moment of company that would have been this correlation between the saxophone, between the clarinet, for which the solo is originally composed, and the saxophone, I didn't want it to sound like a duet, because the dimension of it being a solo is very important. And maybe later Olivier can also talk a little bit about how we mixed it in the space to support this idea that what we hear is one sound. We don't hear a duet. We hear one sound which is made of 2 voices or of 2 instruments. So in that sense, the idea of those bendings, or what André was mentioning as a prism, is that for me, the sound is a little bit like the light, that the light is one, you see it through the prism and it becomes many colors. So that's how I like to approach the sound of Time No Longer, that it's one sound, but through the prism of how we deconstructed it, and depending on where you are in the system, sometimes you hear it through the instrument, through the clarinet, sometimes you hear it through the saxophone, and yet it's one sound. So these are these moments of warpings, like André said, where depending when you are, you have the feeling that the same breath, the same amount of time is inhabited by fewer notes, let's say, by the clarinet, and more notes by the saxophone, and yet at any moment we are within the same moment in the perception of time. So there is this breaking the sound in music, as if as a sound it's one, but then it becomes 2 instruments, 2 voices. And Olivier, I mean, this is like André was saying, that that's the way how we somehow scripted it, and we rearranged it, and both for the clarinet player, Sever, but as well as for the saxophone that was played by André. And then there is another thing, the way how we mixed in the space, that yet again in the space, most of the time, depending where you are, you hear rather one of the 2 instruments. So there is a subjectivity that comes also from where you find yourself in the space. So there is the way how we mixed it is what you hear is not only a matter of time, but also it's a matter of where you stand, where you are at any given moment. And these ideas of revolutions between the clarinet and saxophone, that this is where Olivier could bring his input.
In the space, what was really interesting is that in the middle of the space of the system, there was a screen. And so, of course, you can go all around on the pathway or around the screen. And so I put not so much loudspeakers, but there were loudspeakers behind the screen and in front of the screen. So it was really easy to have, for example, the saxophone at the back and the clarinet at the front of the screen. So, and with the incredible reverb of the space, the two sounds, even if they were really separated in the space, were melted very well due to the huge reverb of the system.
I think it would be interesting for people who don't know the space to hear more about the reverb. And as many know, there's about a 17-second echo in the space. And so I wonder if all of you, perhaps you, Olivier, could talk a bit about how you integrated silence into the creation of the score.
Yes, but it's completely necessary, and the score of Messiaen was really perfect for us because, as André explained, it's a lot of brace of phrases, quite short, and so it was really easy for us to slice these phrases, and then to make pause in the editing we made. And so in the space, it was not silence because the sound takes something like between 10 and 20 seconds, depending of the frequencies, to evacuate. So it was very important for us to have these phrases and to be able to slice them.
And we also, I was looking through our notes from all of this, and I saw we even had in the process of creating the progression a day of Ma, which
Absolutely,
because we basically, that was a very long process. We went through each of these phrases that you saw in the score. Maybe it makes sense to put up that Photoshop score also, just to show a little bit. But anyway, we went through and we made very idiosyncratic choices. We approached some things with this technique of trying to warp the actual, almost like a canon, that we made the melodic material visually warped. This was kind of brutal, but it was very effective, and trying to achieve this feeling that Anri was speaking of a kind of interaction from the solo. So the clarinet mostly played from the score. But I guess what's important to understand is that when you see this turntable with this stylus, which has a kind of intelligence going from one part to the next, that actually this was pre-scored. So the actual piece, the progress of it, was all very intentionally precise. And so after we had come to the point where we kind of agreed on the aesthetics of the progression, then we sat for a day and we decided how long each silence should be, and how I don't know, it was kind of in some ways very musical, but also considering the cistern and how the piece would work within the cistern. Does it sound right? This is from my memory, so.
No, absolutely. I mean, once we had recorded the clarinet and the saxophone, and we had an idea of this new continuity of the Abyss of the Birds, which is no longer the chronological continuity of the original piece, that due to the fact that the stylus, even when it loses a contact, it never comes back to where it stopped playing the last time. There was also a real effort and interest that, although it's a CGI, we still wanted the stylus, wherever it fall in the film to play, it corresponded to the real location of that note in the vinyl, as if it was real. We even had my studio developed an app where any musical choice that we took about where in the score the stylus is going to play, through the help, we could also see physically where the stylus was going to play on the vinyl, because that was also very important for the image, the time it takes for the stylus to naturally go from one place to the other on the surface of of the vinyl. When all this was done, and we also had how do you call it, Olivier? Like we measured. I mean, we had somebody in the space to measure the frequency response of the space. So we knew how the space responded to the different frequencies, like Olivier said, and how long it took for it to evacuate the sound, to digest that sound. So this is the moment. After we had prepared this new continuity for us, we wanted to insert all these moments that in the film are represented from these transition moments when the stylus jumps from one place to another on the vinyl. And these were the days in Berlin that we call the Ma days. Ma is this the silence or the composing the silence within a piece of music. And the Ma was both a feeling of how much silence you needed in relation to the narrative of the music, of the sound, but also how much sound the space, how much time the space needed, how much Ma time the space needed to evacuate the sound that was fed through the speakers. So this was a particularly interesting moment of spending maybe 1 or 2 days that we had planned. That would be the days when we worked on the silence, on the time necessary of the silence that ensues, that follows all these moments or all these islands of sound.
And when we received the sound measurements from Houston, so I created I created a kind of modelization of the Cistern reverb, and so that helped us to listen to the reverb of the Cistern, even if we were not in the real Cistern.
Maybe I would suggest we don't have to see the whole of it, but just maybe like 10 seconds of this file that André prepared today, just like by filming on his laptop, a part of the app, like just to understand a little bit how I don't know whether if you have the time to download it and if you have it there handy to share it with everyone.
Yeah.
Is it, yeah, is that something that you sent over to us that we would have?
I sent it just before we started, called Sala Q app, but I don't know if it made it.
We'll find out momentarily. Okay, yes, I gather that it's coming up.
Okay.
This, yeah?
Yes.
Great, so that gives us a feel for it.
So we could, in a way, we could play with all this, how much silence we wanted to give, how much, having already added the reverb of the space. So it really allowed us to anticipate a lot of that. The last thing in relation to that moment, I'd like to say, it was very interesting because, like André said earlier, it's a piece for clarinet, so it's a piece for a wind instrument. Breath is very important. Breath is very important both to the clarinet and to the saxophone. But at the same time, we also had to compose the moments of breath for the space, when the space could breathe again. And these are the moments when basically it's evacuating the sound, and it can breathe again to host a new arrival of sound, the next sequence of sound. Maybe it would be interesting to share also this clip, which is like a documentation from the Cistern, like in the film In the Cistern, because we've been speaking so much about the acoustic of the Cistern, and it gives an idea of the sound there.
Yes, we'll pull up the video of the work in the actual space, whereas earlier we saw an excerpt of the video itself. Yeah. I thought we could pause it now and talk a bit about what you've seen. So I'm so glad we saw the excerpt at the beginning, because it really conveys what's in the video in a way that when you're seeing it in the space, but on video, you don't really get the content as much. So my first reaction when watching it on my computer screen, having seen it in person, is it really, you really have to see it and hear it in person to get even remotely a fraction of the effect, right? Because the space is so massive compared to documentation of it. But it gives a sense of how site-specific this work is and how totally, I think, immersive it is. And it might be interesting now that we've watched something with our eyes to hear a bit more about how the work is installed in the space, right? And so if you could talk about the materials that you used, how long it took to install the work in the space, and sort of what your process was from when you got in there until the moment when it opened to the public. As much detail as you'd like to provide, any of you, about what perhaps changed once you got in the space, and also just how it was originally envisioned to be in versus how it's now viewable to the public.
Well, I think what relates to it being its own site specificity in space, it's that once in the space, it's not about the film. It's about the film becomes like an instrument that plays the space, that becomes visible at times, and then there are other moments when it becomes completely transparent or permeable. And these moments of permeability, where sometimes you see the film and sometimes you see the space, sometimes you hear the saxophone and sometimes you hear the clarinet. There are these moments of exchange and permeability, which are very important, because in a way they keep the space as one, as a whole. They do not separate the space. There are all these pairs, like between the speaking of the space, being in front of the film or being in the back of the film, seeing it from one side, or seeing it from the other half, hearing one instrument or the other, and so many other, the solitude that comes from the quality of the music, the solitude that comes from what the image suggests to us. They are never there forever, for a long time. So one of the things that I liked about it is how the film, it's true, it needs to lose something of itself. It needs to let go something of itself, so that it becomes about the experience in the space. So like you said, it's like when one sees the film as such, like in a proper viewing, one sees so much more of the film. It's almost like it's like a moment of being projected somewhere in space, and you see so much about the International Space Station, and you feel much more the lack of the gravity surrounding the environment where this turntable is spinning. But then when you are in the space, it's more the sense of the space spinning, of you going around the perimeter, the revolutions of the turntable itself, the revolutions in the mixing between the clarinet replacing the saxophone, and the saxophone replacing the clarinet. So there is a sort of transience. There is nothing is there for too long, and this is, I think, what also somehow this letting go is also what helps and triggers and the visitors to go around. I mean, there is one thing which is absolutely important to that space, is the fragmentation, is the fact that you cannot see such a big image as a whole. The image, speaking in meters, is like the screen is you can't tell when you see it on a laptop or a computer, but it's like 45 meters long and 7 meters high, which I think in feet is like 22 by 150 foot. So, but this image, you cannot see it as a whole. It's continuously fragmented by the columns, and also somehow even the stylus plays hide and seek with the visitor, because sometimes it appears between certain columns, and some other moments it appears totally in the corridor between other rows of columns. So there is this continuously prompting this hide and seek and searching where things are happening, which makes it very site specific, that experience to that place.
Yeah, great. And Olivier, for you, when you came into the space, and was this when you came to install the work, was it the first time you were seeing the cistern?
Yeah, it was the first time.
And yeah, so when you came into the space, first off, you know, were you surprised by anything? And secondly, you know, how did the installation process work from your perspective?
It was really tough because working for sound in such an environment is really hard, and because of the reverb. And in a normal acoustic, in a most, I would say, in a dry acoustic, you have a life of a sound. And we all know what is this life of the sound. There is a burst of the sound and then it dies. And here in the system, I had really to reconsider totally my timeline of sounds I made before when I was mixing the movie in Berlin, because all changed, because there is the sustain of the reverb is so amazing that you can't have the same sound in the soundtrack than in a normal acoustic. So it was really challenging to recreate all the soundscape in the system. When I arrived, I had really to reconsider, and also I had really to remove a lot of sound and to add more harmonic sound, because with the reverb, it's more gentle with harmonic sound, with music, and also with the sound of the spaceship. I created a lot of harmonic sound that fit with the music of Messiaen and with André's saxophone. And also, there is a way to make sound in the system with, let's say, something like 100 or 200 loudspeakers in all around the perimeters, and the sound will be really great like this. But it's absolutely not the approach of Anri. Anri doesn't want to see any loudspeaker, and he wants to use as less as possible of loudspeakers. And so we found a very good solution, I guess, with Meyer Sound loudspeakers, which is a very famous American brand. And this loudspeaker called Kale are often used in very big space as airports. So it allows you to have a dry sound because it's kind of a laser of sound. So it allows us to really point the sound towards the ears of the people all around the perimeter, and not to be disturbed too much by the reverb. But you still have at the end the power of the reverb in that space. So that's what happened.
In a certain way, you could say there was a continuous effort to dry the sound and to wet the image, so to say. It's sort of the wetting of the image, meaning by what I mean by that is that it's the image it's not contained in a frame, what would be normally the cinema experience. It's also thanks to the choice, for example, of the material of the screen, which is material called Holograms, which is able to you can see through, meaning when there is no light, no brightness in the image that is projected, if you are lighting the space in the back, you can see the space uninterrupted, so you can discover the full depth of the space. And then there are the moments when you see, for example, the light in the film falls on the front of the turntable, and then the image becomes very shiny, and therefore it's there for this fleeting moment, and you can't see through. So this is also what helped when I spoke before of making the space permeable, making the image permeable, making the both halves of the space communicate constantly with each other, what is before, in front of the film, and what is in the back, so to say, of the film. And the holograms is a material that actually it's meant to use for projection of holograms. But in this case, it's absolutely not a hologram, although it does give to the turntable some sort of hologramic quality in the way how it appears out of nowhere in the space to disappear again nowhere within the space.
Yeah, it's like watching a three-dimensional film a little bit for the viewer, but it's not a three-dimensional film.
Exactly. I mean, I'm very interested in that sort of to desynchronize the tools from what they are made for. In that sense, it's desynchronizing the screen, which is made for hologram, but not use it to show hologram. Also, in ways sometimes in the past of being interested to use this camera. I mean, the cameras that you use to shoot 3D film, for example. If you put them in a certain position and by putting exactly the same lenses, but then I'd be interested to not put the same lenses on both cameras. So it produces, something goes wrong with this encompassing idea of the 3D. So I like to play or to undermine somehow the goal of the tools, because this is also where one finds new qualities of such tools. Like such as in the case of the holograms for Time No Longer.
So this is great. I would like to be able to take some questions. So for those of you who have questions, please put them in the chat. We have one now that I will pose to all of you. But before I do, because we may lose some people at the end here, I would like to just mention that there will be a live performance of the entire quartet for the End of Time. In Buffalo Bayou Park, up above the cistern at a space called the Waterworks. So we hope that everyone will join. It's this coming Sunday, and we will put the details in the chat. It's a collaboration with the music organization Da Camera, and we're very excited for that. So please come and hear the music live and also see the installation if you haven't yet. So the question that we've received, I'm going to paraphrase this question, but it's really, to me, a question about languages that artists of different disciplines speak, right? So the question was basically, Anri, do you have a background in music? And if not, or even if so, how is your communication with people who are speaking a musical language? How does that communication work?
Well, I would say that I do not have a background. I mean, I did study violin when I was young, for maybe a kid for 6 years, but like with the same eagerness that I tried to learn it and study it, with the same eagerness I tried to forget it afterwards. So in a way it left something, but it's a little bit. It was like the experience of a Holocaust. Like it's not there to stay. I think that somewhere intuitively I have a sense for music. I know what I'm particularly interested in music, and I think this comes across in the works. And also, I like the fact of not coming from within the music, but being an outsider to it. Somehow, sometimes seeing opportunities or qualities in a piece of music which are not necessarily the ones that if I was a musician I would be in totally fully occupied with. Then I don't know. I mean, maybe it's interesting to know from André how it is, because with André I've been, I mean, of course with Olivier I've been working for 20 years now, but also with André being a musician. When we work on projects, and the same thing with Olivier over all this long collaboration, we invent a lot of words, meaning which are not necessarily musical words, but they mean something in every project about the music. Like in the score before, for example, there are all these moments that we try to explain this sort of correlation or this between the clarinet and the saxophone. And from the beginning, I was thinking of them as bendings, which is a better word for it would be like warping, because you are warping the perception of time by the way we are this sort of nano-writing the music, the notes within the score. So every project brings new words and vocabulary, but which is also a witness to the fact that I do not necessarily speak in musical terms, but I always like to find new terms for the different projects.
So in a way, inventing your own language that's a hybrid language of the different disciplines.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a full language, but like inventing words that means something also beyond the musical effect that we are looking for.
Yeah, and actually I can say also, because we have also worked on many projects together, Anri and I, basically since more than 10 years or something, and developed performances. So what I can say for sure, what I really appreciate is that I often feel that I have a very granular view of what I'm doing, and that Anri looks at things more from this kind of like a bird in the sky looking down on the whole kind of terrain of music, and then he can kind of, you know, with his eagle eyes, he can see some things. Well, you know, eagles see so well because apparently they see, their eyes see in 5 colors instead of like an RGB. I think this is kind of how Anri is approaching music. And so it's always very fulfilling and fascinating for me, because then I get an input from a completely unique perspective but he really is looking at things in a kind of very advanced way. So I wouldn't say that it's like the naive or like this kind of brute, like untrained person, but rather that Anri is kind of like no, not overtrained. What, I don't know what the word for it is. We have to invent a new word for this, Anri.
That's great. It's like a transcending of any specific language and sort of layering in all of these different, that's my interpretation of what you all are saying. But we have another question from Alana Heiss from PS1. Hello, Alana, who's asking, does the ghost of Max Neuhaus haunt any of you? No answers there.
I have no ghost in my life.
No ghost in your life. Yeah. Well, so another question also, there was a comment about the use of light in the work, and we didn't talk very much about lighting in this talk because we were so focused on music and sound, but you know, briefly, we did talk about the sort of revelation of the space at times. We're showing the film, you can see through the screen at times, and in other times you only see the film really, and it's much more saturated on the screen. But I know from experiencing the installation that the lighting design evolved quite a bit in the time that you were in the space. And I wonder if very briefly, because we don't have a lot of time left, if Anri, you wanted to speak at all to, you know, how you worked with Patrick, our lighting designer, to think through, you know, how the light manifests into space and within the context of the work.
Well, yeah, light is a very important. It's a very simple element in that space, also due to the means that we could afford to have. So there are these 2 ARRI lights, fantastic, but only 2, which are positioned behind the screen, and they play together. They are connected to the time code. They are connected to the sound. Somehow they communicate with lights that are happening within the film, and sometimes they communicate. They have a life of their own, one is to say, playing very close with the transparency of the screen. So in all the moments, like the film is made of all these revolutions that you see the front of the turntable and then the back of the turntable, and more or less this is what is going on all the time. So every time that the image is on the back of the back of the turntable being a black metal, it's relatively dark. So these are the moments when one can see through the screen, and these are also the moments when the lights activate or make visible the second half of the space, the space behind the film, which I think for many reasons is very interesting to me, because there's this moment when the background of the film is no longer the background of the fiction, meaning it's no longer the International Space Station, but it's the space where we are now, or where the visitor is at that point. So there is this revolutions between projected space and the real space that are enabled by this very close dialogue between the film, the transparency of the screen, the lights being activated, and the sound that accompanies all this process. This was an idea that it was there from very early on, because that's also one of the main ideas of choosing the hologos, was also to play with the fact that the image, the projected image, the film is not the limit of the space, but it's only somewhere on the way. Like I've been always very interested in this idea of how you look at the story, how you look at the narrative. Like how do you look at the transparent narrative, or how do you look at a film? Usually it doesn't happen in the cinema. Like how do you look at the film in perspective? Like what is the feeling of seeing a narrative in perspective, which is both the physical perspective, but also the idea of passing by a narrative? Or how does it feel to see the film from behind the film? And also playing in this way with Patrick, like working with the lights, it was also about differentiating also the space. So even in terms of the experience of the visitor, there is something, what you see from the back is very different from the experience of what you see from the front. I would say that from the front, if the film and the whole space feels more composed, and when you go through the back, it becomes more. It's almost as if you see the organs. It's like from the front you see a portrait, and then as you go through the back you see the anatomy of the piece, of laid bare and yet considered.
Very much so. I mean, that was one of my biggest surprises as I saw the piece evolve, was that walking around the back, it was a little bit like going backstage, but not completely, you know, because it's intended to be viewed in 360 degrees, and that's very clear. But there is also a way in which you are seeing, yeah, like you said, the organs of the piece. Yeah.
There is also a last thing to mention is that, of course, there is these lights that we brought in the space, but also one thing which was very important, simple, we could use it. It was to include also the existing lights of the perimeter, which are part of the what is given there, like the cistern with this LED sort of lights under the rail of the perimeter, and include them in what is happening in the film, include them in what is happening in the space. So they're also being activated by the story, by what is happening, by all these shakes, and they become part of the whole work. So they involve the corridor, like the perimeter around, they make it part of the work.
Yes, yeah. Well, we've run out of time. I could talk with the three of you all day, but I'm so grateful that you were able to join us from halfway across the world, and especially grateful that we get to host this incredible work here in Houston until December. Please join us to see the work, and also for all the public programming associated with it. Be sure to sign up for our email newsletters so you know what's coming next. And thank you again very, very much for joining us, Anri, André, Olivier, and everyone else.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.